Welcome to the Elite BSC podcast, where our entire focus is helping commercial janitorial contractors succeed. You want a growing company, a thriving team, and healthy profits, and we are here to help. My name is Jordan Tong. I'm the founder of Elite BSC, a company dedicated to helping janitorial companies grow and thrive. I also serve as CEO and one of the owners of France Building Services. France is a janitorial company employing nearly 600 people. Since 2007, we grew from 1.5 million to more than 20 million in annual revenue and built what I think is one of the best teams in the world. The goal of Elite BSC in this podcast is to give owners in the industry a vision of where their company can be and the information and tools to get there. I want to share what I have learned over the years to make this a reality for you. Hey, it's Jordan here. So, hey, before I get started today, I ask for this sometimes, but if you wouldn't mind to drop us a review if you're listening on Apple or Spotify or whatever platform you're on, it helps out the show, and I'd appreciate it. I know the janitorial podcast space is not a booming podcast space, but if you find this beneficial and you give us a rating on there, we would appreciate it, and I think it might help the show out a little bit. So, I'm going to continue on from a theme that I started last week in talking about leadership and some of the applications in our industry. And I want to talk about this week. I read another article, another Harvard Business Review article that was published many, many years ago by the father of modern management, Peter Drucker. And I've talked about Drucker a few times on this podcast, and he's one of those thinkers in the business world that is a bit timeless. There's certain authors that their books die with them, their ideas die with them. They have a short lifespan. But there are some authors whose works continue to be talked about over and over and over. And Drucker in the business community is one of those authors. So just maybe to tee this up, when you think of a real leader, what comes to mind? So when we think of someone, man, he was a great leader. Usually, at least initially, unless we've been reprogrammed, we think of someone with charisma, boldness, confidence, kind of the typical hero, the leader hero. And there's a sense in where there are some of those. But for those of you all that have read Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, he reminds us in there that most of the great companies, the leaders were actually not those kinds of individuals. It doesn't mean an individual like that can't be successful or lead a successful company. They certainly can, but that's not necessarily the key ingredient that makes a leader a great leader. It's something else. And if you remember from Collins' book, Good to Great, I think he talks about what's called level 5 leadership. And it's the idea of this humility combined with an unwavering resolve to succeed or get things done or whatever. So, but Drucker does something a little bit different. Instead of focusing on maybe some of those personal qualities, he talks about what can make an executive effective. That's sort of the subject of this particular article. And I think there's certainly some application for us as we think about this as leaders in the janitorial industry. We're not executives in the sense of we're running a Fortune 500 company, but anyone who's managing anything is an executive on some level. And Drucker makes that clear. So that term, I guess, can be a bit of a misnomer if we only think of, large corporations. But anyone who's managing anything is an executive. And I think one of the things that he wants to answer here, and it's something that I think we want, is we want to be more effective. And and we see this as important because early on, when you started your cleaning company, you were the one doing so much of the work. And it was more a function of how hard you could work, how many different hats that you could wear to sort of put things together or hold things together, keep the company growing, going forward, and holding it at the seams to keep it from coming apart and pushing and pushing and pushing. But then at some point, the company begins to change a bit, and you start hiring people, in particular maybe managers or administrative staff, and no longer are you the one doing all of the work or most of the work. Now you're having to, the company's taking on a life of its own, and you're having to get that work done through other people. And so this requires you to enter a new phase of leadership that will make you effective. So what made you effective early on wasn't necessarily leadership quality as much as it was just a hard work, tenacity sort of quality, maybe a sales mindset, etc. But now you're going to have to step into more leadership mode because you're going to be working through other people in order to accomplish the aims of the company. And that's going to require you to be effective as a leader. So imagine a world where you're able to move the company forward year after year. You're building a team. You're leading that team. You're seeing the company thrive. The company's growing in size and profitability. And I mean, this isn't the full picture of success for business owners, but it's certainly a part of the vision. And in order to do that, in order to achieve that vision, that thing we'd like to see happen at our organization, we need to learn to be effective leaders or effective executives at our company. And this is something that can be learned. At the very end of the article, Druckers talks about that this is, although certain people are perhaps born with a greater propensity to do some of these things well, effectiveness is a discipline, and a discipline is something that can be developed over time. So just to dive into some of the meat of the article and maybe how it relates to those of us that are leading cleaning companies or managing within a cleaning company, he lists 8 keys to effective leaders, and we're going to cover 6 of them because 2 of them were a little bit, to me, more applicable for a large organization, and I don't think carry as much weight as the others. So I just want to go through each of these and then and explain what he means by them, and then draw out a little bit of application in terms of what it might look like for us in our organizations. Okay, so the first step or the first key to being an effective leader is to ask what needs to be done. Now, this sounds so simple and elementary that you think, why do we even have to say this? But it might be the most important and the most critical, and the one that we fail at so often is that we find ourselves rushing around, held captive to the tyranny of the urgent, and just doing whatever we think needs to be done at any given moment or whatever. Instead of stepping back and saying, hey, what is the one thing that needs to be done that's going to push this organization forward? Or what are maybe the 2 things that need to be done? Because you can only, and he highlights this, you can only do so many things at a time in an organization. And so maybe, and again, this is not like a permanent thing, but you may be looking out the next 6 months or a year, and it's like, hey, right now, what are the things that need to be done to get us from point A to point B? What are the most important things? And what are the things that only I can do that I need to begin pushing on and working on to help advance the company? So it's so easy to get wrapped up in these little fires that happen and some of the whirlwind of the organization and it's hard for us to have the discipline to not get sucked into some of those things. But if we can, and we can only focus on the things that are going to drive, that are going to have the most impact to push the company forward, we're going to be more effective. So the first key is to ask what needs to be done. The second one that he lists, the second key to an effective executive, is asking the question, is this right for the organization? And the idea behind this is something that I've used, a phrase that I've used before that came out of the book, The Breakthrough Company, is the idea of crowning the company. So it's asking the question, this thing that I'm going to be pushing on, this thing that I'm going to say, hey, this is something that needs to be done based on the information and what I know about what's going on in the organization. Is this the right thing for the company? Like, is it good for the company as a whole? Does it not just serve me or just serve, one particular end, but is it good overall for the organization? And that's a key question that needs to be asked. In a lot of us, we have family businesses In our industry, there's a ton of family businesses where there's often more than one family member involved. And this can get tricky as well. And so we can sometimes be thinking in terms of, does this benefit such and such family member? And we just need to always keep in mind the company first, because I think what's going to bless the family members and everybody else that works there is putting the interest of the company ahead so that it can take care of the people that work within it. So number 3, the third key is to create an action plan. And so Drucker says that knowledge is useless to executives until it has been translated into deeds. And the idea here is that we're just going to create a plan. Now, this is not some permanent set in stone, here's exactly what we're going to do. But it's just a statement of intentions. Like, hey, we are going to put in a sales process, and we're going to hire somebody that's going to do the marketing work for us and the calling and the emailing and list building. And by the end of the year, we're going to have this marketing process in place. We're going to have a person in that role, and we're going to be building out our sales pipeline by the end of the year. And so this is sort of I have some intention, maybe some goals tied to that. We're not married to this. Maybe something will change or come along. But it's the idea of, all right, I know it needs to be done. I know this is good for the organization. Now, here's my plan to get that done, and it's specific. That'd be number 3. Number 4 is to act. And I'm just going to read out some of these bullet points here when he talks about a decision being made. And this is so true, because as executives or as leaders, we often make a ton of decisions during the day, or we have plans that we want to do. But they often don't end up getting done. And so here's what he says. He says, the decision has not been made until people know the following. And so this is, if you're making a plan, people in the organization need to know what's happening. So the name of the person accountable for carrying it out needs to be known. The deadline, the names of the people who will be affected, and the names of the people who have to be informed of the decisions, even if they are not directly affected by it. And so the idea here is that if we're going to we create this action plan, and if we're going to act on this, which is our 4th key, we need to have clarity on what that is and communicate that clarity, which leads us into number 5, which is take responsibility for communicating. And here's the idea here is that we need to just make sure that our action plans, and you could even zoom out a little bit, our vision or where we're trying to go or the specific things we're wanting to do are communicated clearly, consistently, and regularly to the people that are involved. And when we do that, we're going to push along the process, because a lot of initiatives within our companies stall when it requires more than one person, or maybe there's multiple people involved, and there's not a good level of communication in terms of who's responsible for what and the expectations, and an ongoing maybe progress and update, et cetera, to those things. And so taking the responsibility to communicate regularly, effectively, consistently will help you become more effective in carrying out that thing that needs to be done. And then lastly, and this one sort of stands out on its own, but it makes a lot of sense, is Drucker says that we need to think and say we instead of I. And I think what he means by this is that it's easy for us as leaders to kind of get stuck in our own world a bit and see the company as people who are working for us. And I want to do this, and I'm going to do this. But embodying a language of, hey, we are individuals, but we're operating as a group towards something, and we're all a part of something. Even though I'm the owner, I'm also, or the leader, I'm also a part of the thing that's being built. I'm a part of the team. And the old cliche, there's no I in team, and there's truth to that. And which is why I think humility, which is one of our core values at our company, matters so much, is it's a putting others before ourselves regularly, and that leads to us being more effective. And so for a leader to be effective in all those things before, some of those other those other 5 keys that we referred to, having this we mentality, this team mentality as opposed to a me mentality, is going to just generate motivation for people to carry out the things that you're wanting to get done, to buy into the vision, to do the things you're wanting at your company. So maybe that's, increasing your, doing a better job with your training process, or taking on new accounts, or expanding into a new area, or, just being willing and excited to go the extra mile to serve the customers, or do the hard things, or slog through, some hiring issues and some training issues and turnover issues. The idea of having a team or a we mentality is going to create, it puts extra gas in the engine in order to make that happen. So these are a little bit of a scattershot in some ways. Some of these logically flow together, but some of them stand alone a bit on their own. But knowing the information and asking what needs to be done, like what do I need to be working on right now that's going to have the most impact? Asking if it's right for the organization, creating an action plan, acting on it, communicating clearly to the responsible parties and people who are involved in the deadlines, etc., and having a team mentality throughout, I think can help you advance your company to the next spot that you're trying to get to. And I think it is a key as a leader to continuing that momentum of positive change and growth in the organization. I certainly don't embody this well. This is certainly a discipline for me. The communicating effectively is one I've struggled with. The creating an action plan, I'm pretty good at the first 2. I'm pretty good at the last one, but those in the middle about, acting and taking responsibility for communicating, those are a bit more of a struggle for me. So it's a discipline that I need to continue to work in. And I'm thankful for people on my team who certainly excel or are better than me at some of these areas. So I hope this is helpful. I'd encourage you to check out that article. You could, again, like the one last week, you'll probably find it online. It's the title of the article is "What Makes an Effective Executive" by Peter Drucker. There's also a classic book that he wrote called The Effective Executive. It's a 250-page book. But this article is in some ways a summary of some of the things that are contained in that book, and it's a worthwhile read. So I hope you found that helpful. And next week we're gonna maybe shift gears and talk about something a little bit different. So have a great week, and we'll see you next time. If you found the information in this podcast helpful, please like and subscribe on whatever podcast platform that you're using. If you would like more resources or help to grow your cleaning company, head over to EliteBSC.com. We have loads of articles, videos, free tools, coaching options, and a lot more. If your company is greater than $500K in revenue and you want to take your learning experience to the next level, check out our mastermind group. You can learn more about that at EliteBSC.com/mastermind.